A unique part of the process that Frank Gehry uses with his design is to engage very deeply with his clients, and there's quite a long process leading up to the final shape of the building. And I'm just wondering how that process works, because it's very different from other architects who might say, well, here's the design, take it or leave it. How does the process of engagement work and lead to final solutions?
Well, we design buildings generally from the inside to the outside. So if it's a concert hall or it's a theater, it's about the interaction between the audience and the performers. And the building really, the core of the building, the real kind of value of it is about that human interaction. So what's interesting about a school, about your school, is the way you teach, and the building is only there to support the activities that are going on inside of it. So of course we have to kind of climb inside your head, figure out how you do what you do, and then really try and create the best environment to make that happen. So it fosters interaction between students and teachers. It fosters interaction between researchers, and it has to do with just getting the building right for that. And then so the beginning of the process is a lot of dialogue, talking about how you do, what your kind of goals and visions and aspirations are, and then gradually we start to put together functional relationships, and then components of the building, individual rooms and then components of the building, and build it up. And then finally, after going through that long process and understanding what you're about, there's a kind of body language that starts to develop out of that. It becomes the architecture of the building, and there's there are moments of inspiration when Frank kind of gets it and goes, okay, now this is what's going to happen, and the building's going to start to move and flow, and things are going to happen. But that's only after a very painstaking process. Frank says it's like watching paint dry, and it just like we kind of plod along through doing our thing.
Yeah. In our case, our vision that we're hoping will connect with the building is one for business education.
Right.
And of course you've done a business school before, the Weatherhead School of Management, and you've done other educational buildings, the MIT Starter Building and Princeton Library and others.
Yep.
I wonder what is unique or special about education, or even a business school, that might be reflected in the physical spaces and the environment that people inhabit, because, well, we're academics and students, we have particular needs, and you must have studied those in the discussions that you've had in other institutions. Can you see how that connection can take place with the vision at UTS, and what form it might emerge in the building at this stage?
It's hard to say at this point where, we don't know where we're going to end up. And, different buildings are expressive of, like the building at MIT, it's a building for scientists, and, they have a lot of quirky ways, and we wanted to make a building where, we went into their lab spaces, and they have all the computers and wires and all the tools of their trade, all the things that they work with, and a lot of old and funky furniture and all that stuff. And we're in a building originally that was a World War II surplus building, and they were very comfortable in their space. And we wanted to make a building that they could bring all their junk, all their stuff, all their tools, all their furniture, and bring it in, and it would feel very comfortable then when they moved in. And it required a very open aesthetic, an aesthetic that wasn't precious, that that allowed them to just move in and feel comfortable. Now at Princeton, very different kind of client, very different. They were after a more traditional academic environment, even kind of going into one of our buildings, which is a little. It wasn't collegiate Gothic, let's put it that way, but required a more refined space, something more finished, where there weren't wires flying off of. And so for you, I don't know yet. I don't know where we're going to end up. So that's what the exploration is about.
Yes, yes. Well, our vision would encompass the breaking down of boundaries within the faculty, within our organisation, to overcome silos of disciplines, schools, and also to break down boundaries with the outside community, with business, right, and with the city generally, because we're a very centrally located business school. And we're looking forward to the dialogue in which that can take shape. And one of the phrases that Frank Gehry has used is the process of liquid into crystal. That there's a process which is liquid, which is one, right, where things can change, and then at a certain point it has to take physical shape and be decided on. How do you see that process evolving in our case?
We are starting to understand your relationship to the business community in Sydney, and so we absolutely want to make a building that is going to invite the business community into the building. And I don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, but those people need to feel comfortable when they come in. And so figuring out the materials, the kind of level of finish, and it goes right down to the furniture and how the spaces are arranged is going to be really important. The creation of the environment that encourages the intellectual interaction, I think, is really an important point. I was talking to one of the teachers that was in the meeting this morning, and he was talking about what researchers do and the kind of environment that they need. And he was talking about that he needs to be able to have a space where he can read, where he can think, where he can write, and that environment needs to be quiet. He needs privacy, so we need to create those spaces. And then the other part of that, which you didn't talk about that much, but I think is that when you come out of that very private space, the space of contemplation and thought, then you want to meet people and you want to be able to share the ideas that you've been thinking about. And our experience is that kind of thing happens around food usually, or drink. You need to come out and get a cup of coffee, and so to make the social spaces that are where you come out from and then go back into, and to put the spaces in the right proximity so that it happens easily. And I think there's a whole kind of hierarchy. I think some of that happens within the faculty group. Some of it happens between the different departments, and the kind of interaction spaces need to happen at different scales. At MIT, we started talking about neighborhoods, where different labs would kind of in the same area of the building would relate in kind of neighborhood fashion. And then there was almost like a town square where the departments came together, and that was where the cafeteria, the cafe was, the main food thing was. So it's trying to figure out those things that happen naturally so that the interactions happen. The other question was about when the building crystallizes, which is it's a very tricky part of the process because early on we fight to not let people bond too much to any particular design, because if it happens too early, it shuts down the process before it marinates and gets to a good solution. So we do all kinds of things to keep the thing flowing. I mean, my experience is the longer the design process goes on, the better the building gets. And even if it gets messy like that and gets broken, if the design gets broken and then put back together again, you've learned so much, the journey, the moving along, getting to that point. Each time it gets broken apart, it gets better. I mean, Tom Krenz, who's our client at the Guggenheim Museum, kind of loves that part of the process, because he knows that if you get to the point and you have to break the thing apart, that the next iteration is going to get better. So.